Hello, welcome. I am Dr. Paul Dyer. Welcome to Bridges Live Presents You Be the Judge. Every Wednesday at 6 p.m. we are here, and my other two lovely co-hosts, Judge Claudia Barber and Marilyn Pierre, who's running for Circuit Court Judge in Montgomery County. Just to give you guys a preview or some education or commercial notes, remember on July 8th and 9th at Morgan State University, the Caucus of African American Leaders are having a Black Action Convention here at Morgan State University. It is to come bring your voice, your wisdom, and your solutions. We'll be talking about crime, education, civic engagement, voting, and we'll be talking about things that affect the Black community in a whole. We'll be having breakout rooms and discussions to come up with a policy and or plan. This is not a rah-rah event. Please, you can bring rah-rah, you can bring cheers, you can pat yourself on the back. But we need solutions because there's tons and tons of problems that affect Maryland as a whole. There's certain counties that do things very well, and there's other counties that don't do things very well. There are certain areas of Maryland that does great for Black America, and there's certain areas of Maryland that doesn't even consider Black America. So us coming together so we can develop a Maryland policy, so we can end up doing this across the nation. But let's start here at home. Let's start here in Maryland. Let's start working on our solutions and not just complaining. Judge Claudia Barber, what are you thinking? How has your week been?
I am doing well. That week has been excellent. It has been exciting to learn that where there's been the needle is moving a little teeny bit on gun control legislation, just a teeny bit, but it's moving. And I also read a story about the city of Houston making a big impact on homelessness.
Yes.
I mean, they have built up homes for the homeless.
It was encouraging, and I agree with you. I read the same article, and to me, it's not that I poo-poo the whole thing, but this is not a brilliant idea. We can all do it. We have tons of school buses that are out of commission. We can turn to homes. We have tons of empty buildings that we can turn into homeless shelters. But go ahead, Judge Gloria Barber.
Yeah, I'm impressed by that. I am excited that a city has taken the initiative and it's gone nationwide to the extent that the news has spread, that there is a doable way to attack homelessness so that everyone does not have to live not everyone, but homeless people do not have to continue living in the streets.
Right. So we're going to get right into, I guess, Brandy Books is running for at large, and she'll tell you more about what she's doing. Remember, this is a voting, every year is a voting year to me. I really think that. So let's go with that. But I'm going to keep saying this over and over and over and over again. I still think this is probably the most important election we have since Reconstruction. Since the 13th Amendment passed, I think this is the voting information we have, because I think our universes are going to propel in a trajectory that's either going to go this way or this way after this election. And it's not so much, is it good or is it bad? It's just going to turn. And this ship has been turning, it's been turning, and it's been catching on fire, it's been taking in water, it's been going through a lot of things. And we need some responsible leaders. We just had an interest hike, right? So we're at 0.75%. So we might as well just call it 10% interest right now. We're at economic growth. That's what the Fed has raised it to. So that means mortgages are going up. Who doesn't impact the most? Lower income. We know this. It affects homeless. We talk about homelessness. It affects where people live. Where can they afford to live? Because if interest goes up, that means apartment rates are going up. Let's look at it that way. If interest rates is going up, that means food's going up. So we're besides food deserts, we're in food shortages. So Brandy, welcome to You Be the Judge.
Thank you so much, Dr. Paul. It's great to be here. Just Claudia, it's so wonderful to be here with all of you. And I just want to start by saying that I really appreciate how you all have been digging in, making sure that candidates are regularly coming on your show because, like you said, this is a critical year. And let's start with what you were first saying about every year being an election year. This is so true. Almost every year, we are going to be having either some sort of local, like city, local, or county, or state or federal election going on in our communities. And one of the worst things in terms of our democracy is how we've been trained to ignore our state and local elections in favor of the federal level elections and what I often call to people, because this is how I feel about it, the federal circus, right? Like you just watch this three-ring circus of dysfunction in many cases that feels really frustrating, where it feels incredibly difficult to move things forward, where you see all sorts of things being bandied about like it's a game, as opposed to like it's about our lives. But then you have our state and local elections where we really get into the details of what impacts our lives day to day. But because so much of our focus is put on that federal circus, we get disenchanted and we're just like, politics is, I don't want to have anything to do with it. And we ignore our state and local elections, which are critical, again, because of the impact that state and local laws have on our lives, but also because what happens in our local and state elections is the breeding ground for what's going to happen at the federal level. It's the place where we develop political leaders. It's also the place where we develop innovations, both good and terrible, in public policy. And so if we're not paying attention to our local elections, we are missing the opportunity that we have to be the most powerful in shaping both the present and the future of our politics. And that's ultimately why I'm running. I got really excited about the idea of local government engagement when I was living up in Massachusetts, and I got the chance to be a part of a comprehensive planning process that was deeply like community driven. We had a 60-person community steering committee that was developing the engagement and processing the ideas and making the decisions about our comprehensive plan. And the level of investment that I felt in my community, the deeper level of understanding that I felt in my community after going through that process and really having my voice heard and centered in that process, and being able to work to help other community members really have their voices and their perspectives taken seriously, that lit a fire in me for local government. And so then when I moved down here to Maryland, I was really ready and primed to get more engaged as an organizer, and then ultimately choosing to run for office, because I believe that there is an opportunity for us to really reclaim our democracy. Like it is that serious, whether or not we get engaged in local elections. This is about reclaiming for ourselves our right to govern ourselves, our right to be in the decision-making seat of our own lives. And that's what I'm running on. It's about making sure that folks have access to understanding what's going on in these policy spaces. It's about being transparent. It's about respecting people's lived expertise as real policy expertise. And then it is about changing the nature and the culture of what we define politics as. Politics should not be this weird back and forth backbiting game between insider players. Politics is how we decide how we are going to live together. It is serious business. We need people in office who are going to take it seriously. And that starts with us taking it seriously and taking ourselves and our needs and our voices seriously.
You know, you touched on a lot of things, but here in Judge Corey, I have one question before anyone else has going to ask you a question. First, where are you running? Explain that, because this goes across the area. Most of the people who live locally understand, but this goes nationally out. We're in Montgomery County. We're in Maryland, the largest county in the state. So what is an at-large does? Because I think when people talk about who's running, what's running, and what they do, explain what it is that you'll be influencing or in charge of.
Absolutely. So thank you again. And that reminder, I'm Brandy Brooks. I live in Kensington, which is kind of, I live not too far from the Wheaton Mall here in Montgomery County. And I'm running for county council at large. And so our county council functions in a lot of the ways that people think about the city councils for major cities. So when you think about the city council for DC or for Philadelphia or for Boston, or New York City Council is much bigger, but these councils make significant decisions about our public budget. They make significant decisions about land use, how we use our land. They make significant decisions that can impact education, that can impact the economy. So they set all of these different rules that impact local health services. And so here in Montgomery County, we are over 1 million people. That's larger than most major cities in the country. And our county council, which has historically been made up of 9 members, but will be expanding to 11 members with this election, is the governing body. It's our local legislature. So it makes all of these different laws about our land, about economic development, about wages, about health services, about libraries, so many different things.
I have to interject one thing. In Montgomery County's mostly white men.
Well, Montgomery County as a county is not mostly white men.
Yeah, I'm talking about the city council.
The county council, yes, our county council is not representative of Montgomery County's population. And this is a huge problem. We have become increasingly diverse as a county. 30% of our residents were born outside of the United States. More than half of our residents identify as people of color, Black, Latino or Hispanic, Asian, North African, all of these different folks, but not white folks. White folks are not the majority in Montgomery County. We also have a county where more than half of our residents identify as women or femmes. And when you look at our county council, it doesn't reflect any of that. And the big thing that means, it goes back to something that you were talking about in terms of, all these different issues that we're talking about when it comes to housing or homelessness, or when it comes to the economy. When you don't have folks who represent our community on that council, then that means that critical perspectives about what is going on in our community, about what the priorities should be and how things need to be addressed are left out. And so when we see deep inequalities or people not getting the services they need, it's because they're not getting representation.
But it's funny because it does represent the tax base that feels like they have the most say so.
Well, again, what it represents, I think, is the group of folks who have historically, not just in Montgomery County, but in our state and in our country, been told that they were entitled to be decision makers. Folks who own property, folks who have greater wealth or income, folks who are white, folks who are male. That is who we have throughout the history of the place that has become the United States, who we have always privileged in decision making. And so much of the history of the United States has been to fight back and say, actually, no, there's a much broader scope of people who deserve to be in the decision making seat. And we are still fighting that fight in Maryland. We still have real issues with gender parity in representation. We still have real issues with racial equity in representation. We still have real issues with class in representation. And that's something we don't talk about. If elected to the county council, I would be the only renter on the county council, but 40% of the residents of our community
are renters.
Rent their homes. So again, these disparities perpetuate themselves based on who is in power.
As you're running for an election as a woman, a Black woman, asking people to vote for you who might not be here because they don't own their own homes, because interest rates are rising, because they might have to move into a less expensive county, because there is not enough jobs here for them to high paying jobs that's going to hire them, that's going to work, because not everyone can take the bus to Bethesda. Right? Not everyone can just work in Tacoma Park or where some of these tech jobs are, or Rockville, or where these other tech jobs are, because not everyone can. So they have to work all over the place. So that means it's mass transportation, which is difficult in Montgomery County to get to certain places. It's almost like you have to give an education at the door before people understand what it is that you're fighting against and for. That's got to be difficult.
I mean, it's difficult. Well, maybe it's difficult, but I also feel like it's easier for me because I'm talking about my lived experience and my family's lived experience. So when folks are talking about the struggle to stay in Montgomery County, they're not talking about something that I'm not familiar with. Part of the reason I'm running for office is because I and multiple members of my family live here in the county, and we want to continue to live here. But there are barriers that we face. There are barriers that we face around housing affordability. There are barriers that we face around transportation. There are barriers that we face around healthcare access. There are barriers that we face around employment. There are barriers that we face in making sure that, we can get the right kind of education for my niece. And so when I'm talking to folks on the doors, I'm talking to them about the things that lots and lots of people in Montgomery County are struggling with, including members of my family. When we want to talk about something like the economy, I'm talking as someone who has absolutely worked in tech and worked as a nonprofit senior manager, but I've also worked in hospitality. I've also worked as a secretary. And so when I talk about economic development, I'm not talking about pretending that all of us are going to shift into high-tech jobs and ignoring the fact that our economy relies on service workers, grocery workers, care workers. My platform for economic development is that every single one of those workers needs to be able to take care of their family making a living wage. Not that the only way that we get people into a good economic position is by having them shift into these jobs that are what we consider the good jobs. We need to make sure that every job in Montgomery County is a good job so that every person who is working here in Montgomery County is able to take care of themselves and their loved ones. And that, again, folks want to talk about that like it's some sort of Pollyanna, crazy, radical thing. I'm sitting here and I'm thinking, I would like to increase the tax base so that we can do more. And I would like to reduce the demand on our social safety net because people don't have to use it to make their basic needs. So for me, I'm just talking straight math. I'm just saying, where's the better investment in making sure that people long-term can thrive and grow and help to contribute more to the economy of Montgomery County, or constantly keeping people in poverty and making it so that they can't meet their own needs, and it's a drain on our public dollars. That doesn't seem like good economics to me.
But it seems like it's been working. If anyone have any questions, just please raise your hand. Just let me know. But it seems like it's been working because it has not changed in 20 years. Well, I mean, I'm new to Maryland, and just doing the research, it hasn't changed in 20 years.
I mean, it's not working. Folks are growing increasingly frustrated, but they don't want to talk about why. People are talking about how we're constantly facing more and more demands on the county budget, and we don't have enough money to meet all of the demands. That's true, and people are frustrated about it, but we're not talking about the root cause, and we're not actually talking about root cause solutions. Folks are talking about how Montgomery County schools aren't seen as the peak that they used to be, but we're not talking about all the ways that we are leaving different kinds of students behind because of segregation in our schools, because of inequitable services, because of inequitable discipline. So folks are talking about these issues and are talking about what's not working, but we're not doing the analysis. We're not actually digging down and saying, what's causing this not to work and how do we fix it? And again, I'm here. This isn't just like ideology for me. There are concrete problems that I want to make sure that we fix so that everyone can enjoy this wonderful county and the resources that we have. And again, it's about keeping it basic. It's about keeping it very simple, but also keeping it tethered to reality. The unreality is the part where we pretend that an economy that's based on an economic underclass is ever going to be sustainable, and like that's ever worked in history without crumbling in on itself. The unreality is pretending that racial equity can persist and somehow we're still all going to be okay when we see our society just fraying at every edge.
Judge Barber, I think you froze because I know she had a question.
Mhm.
But I do agree with you, Brandy, about how you keep pontificating about something and yet there's no action. But the people that needs to take the action or force the hand of the action doers, they have a hard time getting to the polls or getting to the council member to say, hey, this is happening in my neighborhood.
Yeah. And I think Judge Barber might be hopping back on. So I'll try and answer that briefly, and then I want to make sure that you can get in
Judge
and
Barber, go
ask a
ahead.
question.
Oh, I was encouraged by everything candidate Brooks is saying. I also believe that many times people know what the answers are or the solutions are, but they don't want to make the solutions happen. That's the best way. And it's just another way of saying, making the problem invisible and the people invisible.
Mhm.
So I'm glad to hear of candidates who are solution oriented, because this whole concept of structural racism and despair, that conversation has gone on for quite some time. Last night I was at the National Association of Women Judges Equity, and most of the judges on the line, they understand structural racism. They understand that there are disparities. They understand the juvenile system. They understand the school to prison pipeline. They understand how that happens. They understand how poverty impacts that. They understand all of that, but they don't have many solutions to
Judge Barber, you're having some. Judge Barber, you're breaking in and out. So, Brandy, go ahead. I know you're going to respond to that. And thank you, Judge Barber, for your comments, because I'm glad you really pointed out when we say if judges don't have the answer, and we see them up on the bench, it's tough for us to imagine how are we supposed to have the answer, but we do as people.
And I think this is the thing, is that as people, sometimes the answers are a lot simpler
Mhm.
than we like to pretend that they are. We like to overcomplicate the solution because the simple answer would actually challenge us to get rid of all these other overcomplicated ideologies that we've built into it. Like, we would have to actually say, hey, wait a minute, I'm not going to believe in this like convoluted belief that meritocracy works, or I'm not going to believe in this convoluted belief of like trickle down economics, or I'm not going to take on this like bootstrap ideology, which doesn't make it, like, it literally doesn't make any sense to pull yourself up by your bootstraps in any kind of physical manner. Like, you can't actually do that. So it's one of the craziest analogies that we use. Whereas when you look at incredibly simple solutions, and I think about this, I go all the way back to one of my seminal points in thinking about politics, which was the 2008 housing crisis. So again, we had all of these enormous banks that had basically blown up our economy, and we were in a massive crisis. And all of these people were about to lose their homes because they couldn't pay these mortgages that had ballooned. So this whole fake financialization structure around housing speculation that we had built was about to collapse in on itself. And we had to develop a national solution. And people were having these debates back and forth about, like, okay, if we're going to give aid, where should it go? And ultimately this decision that had to go directly to the banks because they were too big to fail. We'll circle back to that one later. And I just remember sitting there in 2008 and thinking, why wouldn't we give money to homeowners so that they can pay back the banks? Because then you accomplish two things at the same time. You keep people in their homes and you restore these banks. But then the decision at the national level was to skip part one and just go on to part two. And like, you literally have to skip doing the most sensible thing in order to come up with that kind of solution. And that, I think, is the thing that we see. And it was all this ideology about, talking about moral hazard and all of these things, but it's like, if you want our economy not to collapse into itself, keep people in their homes, restore these banks, and then put real regulations around.
But Brandy,
On that note about too big to fail, let me just say this. All of those banks that got rescued have gotten bigger.
right. But so you again, what you're saying is they didn't care about people. Well, that's the one thing human beings or the population has to understand. I don't think the system cares about people, but yet we have to work in the system to get something out. But the system in itself doesn't care about people, it cares about the system.
Well,
So
and
go ahead.
It all cares
We-
about the what the candidate Brooks just said, that banks not failing, the big people not failing, because I remember during that time when President Obama actually inherited a very volatile economy. And in that particular instance, we rescued the banks. And the same thing with the airline industry. We rescued them again. And they have the nerve to raise the prices of flights such that they're astronomical and almost unaffordable. Because prices of, and the same thing with gasoline. They're not broke and they're not getting broke. They are billionaires.
Yeah.
Times two.
Mm-hmm.
Times
But
two.
we all of this is based in, again, this series of ideologies about who matters and about how prosperity works. We have seen just astronomical, literally incomprehensible growth in the wealth of a very tiny fragment of people, while so many other folks are living on the edge. And somehow we've bought into this notion created by the people who benefit from it, that equals prosperity, that lots and lots of people living on the margins and a tiny fraction of people having like wealth that they can only use by sending themselves up in rockets to the moon is a balanced economy. And we know that's not true, but people keep believing it and buying into it, and we keep reinforcing the entities that benefit from accumulating all of that wealth while leaving all of the people who are actually generating it behind.
Well,
So again, you have to develop a mindset that is literally counter to reality and then build a whole bunch of policy based on a belief in something that fundamentally doesn't match reality. And it ties back to even more fundamental things that we know don't match reality. Let's talk about race. Let's talk about the entire construct of race as this way of trying to decide that certain people aren't human beings.
Right.
But you still want to be able to do certain things with them that you'd only be doing with a human being, like use them to breed new people that you could put into servitude. But you need to create this whole construct that doesn't match reality in order to perpetuate this system of economic and racial and political power. So there are all these ways that these ideologies that don't make sense are deeply embedded in our history, even in our idea of ourselves as Americans. And we are constantly struggling with the fact that we are supposed to be bought into all of that stuff that doesn't actually match our experience on any level.
Which is why voting is so difficult for people.
Yes. And so one of the things that I try and do as a candidate is talk about what's real. And I think people find it very refreshing when someone is going to have a real conversation about how our economy actually works and the role that they play in it and why their labor is important. Or have a conversation about what people actually face as people of color, as Indigenous people, as Black people, and recognizing that there are some distinct experiences there that we got to talk about too. And so when you acknowledge reality and give room for other people to say, oh, my lived experience, I'm not crazy. for perceiving that there's something about this system that's not right, that actually feels very validating. And then that can translate into feeling very empowering, because if you can organize enough folks who are able and willing to look at reality honestly, and then able to do things when we talk about politics, like supporting one another, not pretending that people who can't get to Rockville don't care,
Right.
but actually recognizing that the whole structure of requiring people to only come to this one place doesn't actually match people's real lives. So if you want to do engagement with them, you have to go where folks are. You have to make sure that there are things like childcare. You have to make sure there's transportation. You have to make sure there's interpretation so that people can participate. That's acknowledging folks' reality. And all of a sudden, it transforms the way that someone can see themselves in this political system. And it transforms what they think might be possible when we are talking about policy outcomes. And I tell people all the time that as much as I do sometimes get truly disheartened by the things that I see going on in this world, and I am a human person, and I just get truly disheartened sometimes, I also know that I am here because of all the people before me who organized in the face of craziness that, thank the Lord, I will never have to experience.
We should
And so-
appreciate them more, and I cannot say that enough. We should appreciate the John Browns, the Nat Turners, all of those people who were part of abolishing slavery, because we could be there today.
We could be there today. There are people who fought in all sorts of ways, on all sorts of fronts, to abolish slavery, to end Jim Crow, to make sure that as a woman, I have voting rights. Like, to make sure that I can marry who I want to marry and love who I want to love. Like,
Right.
People have been fighting these fights. And as much as we have this system that is constantly trying to squash our ability to see ourselves as fully human, we keep rising up over and over and over again and inserting the reality of our humanity and winning. Now,
But-
the challenge is that people don't want us to know that we win. So
Yes.
they try and focus on not winning.
Okay, so that's an important point, because we have got to drive this point home that voting matters, and voting is so important at the local level. It's your mayor and county executive that decide who your police chief is, and it is the county council that many times approves, these top people in office. If you're talking about closing the wealth gap and addressing wealth disparities, then we need to put people in office that are paying attention to awarding procurement opportunities and make sure they are adequately being handled. And what I mean by that, there are a lot of private contracts that are inside of government. How many times do you see outside counsel used by the Office of Law, and who are they going to? They don't oftentimes advertise who they go to bring in these law firms that represent the county government and even city governments on certain levels.
But you do know they're friends of people that are in the government.
Of course, you know that. They're
Yeah.
friends of people, so that needs to be explored. The fact that there's no accountability when contracts are awarded to make sure that the dollars in that contract are actually going to minority firms. So it is the local council people and who is running the government, and making sure that again, equity officers are actually looking at hiring practices and promotional practices, and how many people are making complaints about uneven and unfair promotion practices. I am very shocked oftentimes when I speak to my elderly cousins who worked in the federal government for years. There is not one that I can think of that did not tell me about racism in the federal government and how they had to endure that. That's not something new on the surface of anything.
Mhm.
And there are so many agencies in which that has happened to people from the FBI on down to many departments of the US government. And it needs to stop.
Well, you know, Judge Corey Barber, if you go to DC and you peter around whatever downtown DC and you see a homeless person, a person who has no shelter, very little food, and we cannot fix a problem that's in our capital district, that where all these hotels are making enormous amounts of money, and yet in that district of the federal buildings, in and out of those federal buildings, there's homelessness everywhere, and that doesn't get fixed. What makes you think it can get fixed in Cleveland or Maryland or Ohio? If you don't care in the district, why would you allow other politicians to care anyplace else?
So I agree with you, Dr. Paul, and I think that is one of the reasons why actually what we do here in Montgomery County matters, because it is so close to the Capitol. It is so close to a whole series of lawmakers who, one, like other lawmakers around our region, but then also this access to lawmakers around the country. And so what we do here matters significantly because a lot of people will see it. But it also, going back to this thing about voting, we have to put voting in context. And I think this is one of the errors that we run into when we think about organizing. Voting has to be a moment in a much longer strategy of long-term organizing for our interests. Voting is an implementation moment, but it is neither the beginning nor the end of the organizing that we have to do. And this has been, I think, one of the places where there's a real gap here in how we organize, especially I think in some of our communities of color. And some of this is like, we've had this fight so hard just to be able to vote that it feels like just voting is the accomplishment. But we got to realize that scarcity model where we're just glad to be able to vote. No. We gotta look at this more broadly because no one else is going to create this context for us. We have to recognize that we have to be organizing with our people day in and day out, year after year, so that folks are connected to what's happening, so that folks are supported to participate, so that folks are clear on the issues at stake, so that folks know how to engage with their elected officials. And then at that moment of voting, they can implement all of the power and skill and knowledge that they've built to shape who is in their leadership. And then after voting, that organizing work continues because you've got to keep engaging with those people that you put into office. You've got to keep them accountable. We've got to work with them to be the font of ideas. And we need to elect people who want to work in that way with us.
Well, Brandy, you brought up, you hit something as a hammer. Now, let me ask you this. When it comes to voting in Montgomery County and Maryland, the largest county in Maryland, right? 1.2 million people. Do you believe that your opponents are betting that minorities, Black and brown, lower economic people will not come out to vote, and they will not come out to vote? And if they do come out to vote, only a small percentage will vote for you, because the other economic class, the higher percentage, doesn't believe you can do anything for them. So if you can make up some numbers, what do you think that percentage is?
Well, so, let's talk about this for a second. The areas where we have the highest density of Democratic voters by far, registered Democrats,
right,
by far, is in some of our communities in East County.
Yeah.
In the new District 5 that's been created, there are a whole bunch of precincts that have some of the highest percentages of registered Democrats among their voters and some of the lowest turnout numbers in our county.
That's my point.
and so the answer, and this is a real hard answer, but the answer is, yeah, there are a lot of people counting on us not to show up. And there are a lot of people counting on us not to organize. There are a lot of people counting on having beat us down economically in all these other
Right.
ways so that we are just too tired. People are counting on us being exhausted. People are counting on us being overwhelmed. People are counting on us being afraid. People are counting on us being so frustrated and disillusioned. They count on that every election cycle. And the
But they,
reason you know this,
they
so say,
also
go ahead.
on the impact of the wealth gap on us too, which is
Mhm.
something which you also said.
Yeah.
That is, they're counting on us, living paycheck to paycheck, and the only thing we can really think about is getting to our job and putting food on the table. And there's no time to be going out the door voting.
Mm-mm.
That's a
Right.
waste
And
of
so
my
so
time.
so fo- so
There's
folks
nothing's
are,
going to change, and that's
yeah,
how they think.
folks are
Some of
counting
them
on
are
us
white
viewing
voters.
all of those barriers as insurmountable because they want us
Well,
to.
some of also is conditioning. The media has some impact on this because media does not promote the council races as
No.
much as do the other races. They tend to
Again, purposefully.
purposefully, the governor's race is the top race that you're going to hear about, and some scuffle and some news story to knock out one of the candidates there. That's what you're going to hear. Or you didn't heard enough of Marilyn Mosby. They're going to put up something like that. But see, they're not going to put up a story about the grassroots work of what you're doing in Montgomery County as a council member at large. I mean, maybe there are small publications that have put your name out there, but that's another problem because go to the poll if they never heard of your name before and all they see is your sign. If you're out there at the poll and you give them a flyer, they're like, yeah, sure, okay, I'm glad you're out here, I'll vote for you now.
Right. And again, these are all the things. Folks are counting on all of these systems working together in lockstep to disenfranchise us. And the way that you can tell, there's this thing that I hear all the time in candidate circles, and it frustrates me. The way that you can tell is that folks always focus their energy on what we call likely voters. And I think that this is the most pernicious term in politics, because what likely voters means is the folks who face fewer barriers, so it's easier for them to get out, which almost entirely means that they are wealthier and that they are whiter. Oftentimes it also means sometimes that they are older, so our young people who we want to get engaged also aren't being recognized as well. So that's how we skew this. And folks say, okay, those are the people who turn out, so those are the only people I'm going to talk to. Well, guess what? If you never talk to anybody else, it's real hard for them to turn out. But people buy into that cycle and perpetuate it. These things that we call systems, they are the collective of our behaviors as people. And so people constantly reinforcing that likely voters narrative and then saying people of color, immigrants, young people, poor people, those are unlikely voters. And nobody recognizes and reckons with the fact that every time you label someone like that and dismiss them and devalue them, you keep them being an unlikely voter, because it's really hard to vote for people when you haven't heard of them and when you haven't been engaged.
Brandy, we have a comment or a question, and I'm going to read it, and maybe you can understand. Some African Americans don't trust or feel confident that once they vote, the official will actually do and stand on what they ran on, topics of interest, not feel comfortable about how the official will really put forth a good approach to reducing or disparity gap in many aspects. So it's more of like a comment, but so here I actually think there's a better way in our new realm of Zoom or since pandemic, post-pandemic, that things that go on at the city council, local government, police meetings, PTA meetings, we should have access to all those videos, all those meetings, whether we can downplay it or replay it or anyhow we can get it, because maybe I get home at 11 p.m. at night and I can't get to a meeting. But that doesn't mean I should not be allowed to go to X or Y or Z site so we can see what I want to see and hear who I want to hear, and then maybe read the bill or not understand the bill, because then I need to have someone explain me the bill or what's being proposed or implemented. We just need to have that transparency, and it's not there.
Well, and so I want to say two things, like the rise in the use of these additional levels of access is really, really important. And it has opened up our government to folks who haven't been previously able to see it. So it's an important tool, but we can't mistake the tool for the organizing around the tool. So like Zoom access is not going to transform our government.
No.
And you know, and so as we're talking about this, we need to recognize this is a tool in our arsenal. We need to recognize we have to protect that tool because, for instance, at the state level, they work to try and take away that tool. So that and testifying and participating in hearings at the state level is one of the most convoluted things that anybody ever tries to do. And you know, and there was this brief window where people could actually do it a little bit more easily, and then folks had to go through this whole fight in the General Assembly this year to say, we actually need to keep that because there were people who were getting ready, who wanted to pull it back. And so.
Of course they did.
of course they did, because it all of a sudden meant that they had to hear from all of these people that they had structurally figured out how to not have to hear from.
Yes.
And so again, like it is an ongoing organizing fight that we have to constantly make these gains, defend these gains, and then keep on pressing toward the new ones.
You know,
and you know, to the comment that was made. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Judge Claudia.
The General Assembly for a long time has had this thing where, you know, testimonies are at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, in the middle of the day, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, in the middle of the day, during the 90-day session, of course. And of course, everybody that's working a 9-to-5 job, that it just automatically excludes you. So they're not trying. They're not trying.
No, in fact, they are very specifically trying not to.
Bernadette, do you have a question?
Oh, yeah, I was gonna get in after she finished her comment. But first, thank you, Brandy Brooks, for running for office, for being a guest tonight. I just wanted to clarify, is this your first time running for this at-large seat?
No, this is my second time. So I ran in 2018, so some folks may know from my name from then. And this was in that big 33-person primary for at-large for those 4 seats. It was completely crazy. Our first time having public financing, first time with the implementation of term limits, you know, and so it got very wild in that race. But even with all of that and running against a lot of people who had more name recognition than me, who had been in the county more, we placed 7th in that race. And for my first time running as a grassroots Afro-Latina, you know, candidate. And that was really important. We placed 2nd among women. We know that no women were elected to the county council at large in 2018, which was terrible because it resulted in us having exactly 1 woman on the county council. Again, so going back to the comments we were making about representation. And so, you know, even though we didn't clear that primary, we really showed that what we were talking about was resonating with folks and was resonating powerfully. And we've been building on that. We've been building on the organizing work that I've been continuing to do around Montgomery County's Racial Equity Act, around strengthening and improving it by organizing community members to really make sure that we got to shape that bill, and then around continuing to monitor its implementation. My continued work around housing advocacy, my continued work around environmental justice. And so bringing all of that to bear now for this 2022 race, because all the things that we were talking about in 2018, they're still here. A lot of them have gotten worse. So yes.
Yeah. So what do you see as the top 3 issues in Montgomery County?
Yeah. So it is housing, it is a fair economy, and it is transportation, really linked to the question of how we are going to protect our environment over the long term so that we and our children have a planet to live on. So affordable housing is far and away the #1 issue that people come talk about, because whether folks want to move here, whether folks have been renting here, whether folks want to buy here, whether folks want to be able to stay in their homes because they've lived here for 3 decades. Everybody is facing this incredible challenge. Whether folks want their kids to be able to come and live in Montgomery County and not have to live in their basement for the next 10 years, all of this, everyone around. If you were a senior living on fixed income, everyone is facing this crisis in some way. And so this is the top thing that gets mentioned. The other piece people are talking about transportation, how hard it feels to get around. People are tired of being stuck in traffic. They're tired of not being able to get across Montgomery County effectively. That, you know, it takes me an hour to get from Kensington to where my campaign office is in Rockville. That's nuts. You know, so folks are talking about all of that. And then folks are talking about, like, how do we build an economy that actually works for the people in it? How do we build an economy that actually supports these thousands of small businesses that we have here, and especially our businesses of color, our businesses run by folks from our immigrant community, our businesses run by women? How are we doing that? And then how are we making sure that workers in Montgomery County can make a living, a real living, not this job and that job and that job and that job, because people are piecing together 2 and 3 and 4 jobs to try and put food on the table or to try and get their medicine. And there's a ton of people who don't even have healthcare or access to healthcare resources. So these are the things that we're hearing from community members, and urgent. And I think, as someone mentioned before, maybe I think it was you, Judge Barber, these aren't new issues.
No.
We are hearing this, folks, where people have been we've been dealing with this for decades. And that's part of what frustrates me. And that is part of why I do want to invite folks into a new frame, the new frame for this that I'm trying to set as a candidate and hopefully a council member. The same old people who approach this with the same perspective on politics, the same perspective on how you legislate, the same perspective on who they listen to, are going to leave us here for another generation with this brokenness. That is unacceptable.
That's how you know it's done on purpose. So we have to get out of us being so surprised and get people to understand this is done on purpose. And if you're not, it really goes back to, if you're not trying to solve this problem with us, whoever the us is, then you are accepting that this is okay, period. Whether you know it or not, whether you say it or not. So when you ask someone the question, you're like, you're accepting this as okay. Well, what's okay? That people don't have homes. Well, I don't accept that. Yes, you do. You do. And just say you do, because you haven't done anything to help us fix it.
And I don't accept, like, I want to be very clear, that is unacceptable to me. And I've spent and built my career fighting against these unacceptable things, fighting and naming the injustices and working to build systems and structures that change the us, because the us is critically important. And I want to talk about a forum that we held for the campaign a few weeks ago on housing, the most critical issue in Montgomery County. And in that forum, we had 3 amazing Black women, 2 of them from Montgomery County, 1 of them from Baltimore, talking about the organizing that they're doing with homeless residents, the organizing that they've been doing with tenants, the organizing that they've been doing with folks in environmental justice communities to build housing. The way that these women were talking about housing is the only way I want people to talk about housing in Montgomery County, because it was so insightful. It was so clear. And the thing that made the difference is that these issues people aren't being dilettantes about, like, they're not just doing this for play or because they want an intellectual exercise. This is their survival, the survival of their loved ones, the survival of their community. And that's why the us needs to change. We are not seeing results because there's a whole bunch of people in office, and there's a whole bunch of people that those people in office are speaking who don't think of this as any urgency, because they got theirs. So they're cool. They're comfortable, and they don't need to be urgent about addressing homelessness. And they don't need to be urgent about making sure we have a fair economy. And they don't need to be urgent about making sure that people have good health care, because they're all set. So they can dilly-dally about this until the cows come home while the rest of us suffer. And that, to me, is unacceptable.
I have a question about voting, because you said earlier that it's people not voting because they don't feel included so they just don't vote.
Mhm.
But unfortunately, there are a lot of Black and brown people voting against their own interest in the guise of, or with the veneer of, this is a religious type of thinking. I'm voting for this candidate because they said they were against abortion or LGBTQ. So they don't even look to see that they're literally voting against themselves. So how do you appeal to the Black and brown people who are voting against themselves?
So again, it's how do we have these deep conversations about what we've been taught and how deeply it does not work for us. So I'm a Christian. My faith is actually very important to me, and it is a motivator in why I am engaged in politics and why I am engaged in a politics that is focused on justice. Because that's actually one of the most used words in the Bible, is about God's justice. And it doesn't look like leaving people on the street. And the Christian Bible is very explicit about that. And so, when these things that we're told to buy into, so this idea that somehow it benefits us to buy into dehumanizing other people and treating them as less than, we have to recognize, as people who have been treated as less than, all that does is create more space where people think it's fine to dehumanize, and that's going to get turned on us.
Let me answer, Zanetta. Let me see with the people. If you talk to them, are you able to have a conversation of the how and the whys of voting?
Yes, but a lot of them would say they don't want to vote for the Dems. So that's why they don't vote at all in some cases, but they're going to vote Republican because, hey, they said they were against this. They
Right.
said that's awful, this unborn little baby, So they don't look deeper than that.
Well, most people, I had to tell you, most, when I give a percentage, it's like about 41%, literally are single-minded voters. They're single issue voters. And that's why you see them uplift one single issue over the other stuff that they're doing. And
Mhm.
so they know certain people are very hyper concerned about abortion issues or things like that. But it does not, not that, if you look at voting and what they do, does it supersede the other stuff that they do that are sort of not very good and unhealthy? But you don't, it's like the noise is still higher than what they're
Mhm.
doing. So
And
that goes back to the educated voter. Go ahead, Brandy.
well, I think it's education, but again, it's also a culture shift.
Yeah.
We are all getting trained to play into this political circus,
Mhm.
like it's not about our real lives. Every single one of us gets that training, and it's hard to break out of. And so when we want to have conversations with folks who are thinking about these single issue things, it's not actually about arguing the issue. That is not where you start.
Yeah.
You actually start with talking to people about what they deeply value, what gives them joy, what they want for themselves and for their loved ones.
Before we
That's
take
what
off,
you actually
Brandy,
begin
we
with.
want to give you a website to make sure people get that on the air. So what's your
Yeah.
website and what's your thing?
Absolutely. So my website is brandyformontgomery.com. That's BRANDY, the number 4, Montgomery.com. So yeah, what Bernadette typed in there is correct. And that's where you can go and you can see the details of my platform. You can see how we're organizing. You can contribute. One of the ways that as a candidate that I'm really committed to that kind of accountability to community is that I'm using the public election fund. And I wanted to do that because instead of having to chase big money donors over here and then sort of come back around and hopefully talk to the voters that I want to talk to, I get to talk to my voters and donors. They're all the same. Because if people give me $5 or if they give me 250, you're a Montgomery County resident, that gets matched by the public election fund. And it makes our ability to organize money, organize financial resources around what we value in politics. It strengthens that ability, and we need to make use of it. We need to make sure that we are investing our money, because people ask us to invest our money in all sorts of things. They ask us to invest our money in junk food. They ask us to invest our money in all of these ways of making wealth for other people. We have to invest our money in the
Yes.
things that are going to benefit us, in the people who are working to fight with us on the things that matter. So I do want to really encourage folks to check out the website and then to go and see how you can be part of what we are building. We have what is today? We have 34 more days
34 days.
of this campaign until July 19th. We can be connecting with folks in your community, in your friend network. There's so many opportunities. And you are a trusted person among the people you know. This is so important. You are a trusted person.
May I add that it's very, very important for everyone to consider donating to people's campaigns because they need the funds. And it's extremely helpful when they get donations to cover campaign expenses, which includes signs, yard signs, flyers at the poll, having people come to the polls. These are all huge issues, and there are obstacles sometimes that unknown candidates have to overcome because incumbents have advantages in that regard. So please keep in mind to donate to candidates you believe in. Yes.
We have a hard break. It's 7 o'clock. Thank you for listening to You Be the Judge every Wednesday from 6 to 7. Please join us next week as we talk again to someone else. We have a conversation, but understand what Brandy's talking about. Reach out, touch her, ask the question, ask someone the question, talk to someone about something, about voting, about issues, because it's not just what Brandy does, what I do, or whoever does is what we do. And that's the most important. Hopefully you can get that here and You Be the Judge. We're here every Wednesday at 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Thank you, Brandy, for coming on, and thank you for what you're doing, and don't ever stop doing what you do.
Thank you so much.
Thank
It's been a pleasure. Thank you for all the questions. So great.
All right.